Hello and welcome back to Leashing Bar Guests once again for something a little bit different. I am, as always, Fishy, and I am doing things a little bit differently today because I am doing something a little bit different. So you're not used to seeing this kind of just me talking to camera. Normally, if you see me this size on the screen, talking directly to the camera, it's offset and with a map behind me because it's at the beginning of a Mapper Monday when I maybe do a bit of spiel before I go into the actual mapping. This is just going to be me talking to camera. I am going to open up Acrobat, show a page, some stuff in Acrobat in a little bit, at which point we'll swap to that offset. But again, it won't be a map or anything behind me. It'll just be me slightly offset to make room for the Acrobat reader. So, as you can tell, maybe by the title, this is a stream about solo role-playing, solo TTRPGing. Now, I have been thinking about playing solo for quite some time because, honestly, I just don't get to play enough. So it'd be nice to fill some time with some solo gaming. But I've just never managed to get started with it. And I've kind of figured out why, but I'm going to give it another go. I'm going to try and get into solo gaming, solo role-playing, and I'm going to try and do it on stream, partly because if I'm streaming it, I've got to do it. I can't just open it up, look at it, get despairing, and close it all down again. I've got to do it if I'm on stream, right? Makes sense to me. And that's, of course, the other half of the Leashing Bar Guest channel. In addition to the fact that it's about tabletop role-playing games, it's about tabletop role-playing games, or tabletop games in general. I'm not averse to the idea of doing some board game or wargaming content, or even card game content at some point. It's just been tabletop RPGs mostly, because that's my main hobby. And the other half of it is about mental health, and the way in which mental health interacts with tabletop role-playing games. So here, for example, my insecurity, my depression, and my ADHD all get in the way of me doing solo role-playing. All three of them, one way or another, just step up and say, yeah, you really sure you should be doing this? So, a little bit of moral support from even an empty audience. Yeah, I'm not empty at the moment. I am apparently, however, losing battery power on my Bluetooth. So, hang on while I put the other ear in. So, we're not empty at the moment. Hello, Alia. Welcome aboard. But even if there's nobody there, the fact that there's a VOD of it, it's going to YouTube afterwards, and so on and so forth, means that there is that pressure for me to actually do it. So, that means one of two things. Either I'm going to junk the whole stream, or I'm going to start streaming, at which point I will actually do the thing. The thing today is not actually playing a solo RPG, because this is episode 0, which is like my stream's equivalent to a session 0. It's prep work. It's how am I going to get there? So first off, I want to talk about my previous experience with solo RPGs, because I have experience with solo gaming going back way before the modern trend for solo RPGs, and why I've had so much trouble getting into the solo RPG scene, and also to a smaller extent why I've had trouble going back to the old style solo RPG, solo roleplay that I used to do. I'm stumbling over my words here, and this is partly because when I talk about the old style stuff particularly, my brain just wants to go to roleplay. I'm old enough to remember when RPG meant tabletop RPG and you didn't need a TT on the beginning of it because there was the only RPGs there were. Now, computers, video game consoles and computers have really taken over. And when you say RPG to someone now, they think like Elder Scrolls or Fallout or something like that. They don't think necessarily Dungeons and Dragons. It's starting to swing back the other way with the current massive popularity of D&D 5th edition. But even so, we've gone from a situation where we used to have RPGs, then we had RPGs and CRPGs, or computer RPGs, which was the digital version thereof. And we've now gone all the way around to instead having RPGs being the computer RPGs and TTRPGs or pen and paper RPGs for the old school pen and paper RPGs. Now, I don't like that, because in my head an RPG means sitting around a table with your friends rolling dice. Even if it's a virtual table, you're still sitting around a table with your friends rolling dice. That's what an RPG is to me. And a computer RPG is an attempt to simulate that experience as best you can on a video game. And we've got that shift now that it's kind of the other way around. So I've got, in typical ADHD fashion, I have got distracted from my original topic, but that's why I keep stumbling over the words RPG or TTRPG in this at the moment, is because my brain keeps wanting to say role-playing game, and the modern part of my interpretation wants to say TTRPG. And I think what I'm going to do to simplify this for myself, and perhaps for everyone else, I am going to drop the TT from these streams, and I'm going to try and make that a standard across any solo games. I am just going to say RPG. And when I say an RPG, I am not talking about Skyrim. I am talking about Dungeons and Dragons or something like that. So we'll just go with RPG. And when I say roleplay, this is another important point. When I say roleplay, that is synonymous with playing a role-playing game. Because that's part of where it's gone wrong for me with the modern solo RPG scene. I've been realizing, I've been watching a lot of videos since I came up with the idea of maybe doing this this series. I started looking into solo RPGs and trying to get some, watching some advice videos, for example, how to get started in solo TTRPGs, that kind of thing. And I realized that pretty much all of the YouTube content I have looked at for solo TTRPGs are not, by my definition, playing a role-playing game. They are not role-playing in any of them. What they're doing is using an RPG framework as a mechanic for improvised drama. Every single one of them. They're not playing a game, they're telling a story. So this leans into my thing that I've said this before, and I will no doubt say it many, many times again in the future. Role-playing games are not about storytelling. People always talk about that now as them being about storytelling, and that's not. When you sit down to play an RPG, you are not sitting down to tell a story. You are sitting down to play a game. The G is the most important letter in RPG. Because there's a misinterpretation on what role-playing means. When I say role-playing, it means playing a role-playing game. When other people say role-playing, quite often these days, what they mean is talking in character. That isn't role-play. Role-play is playing a role. I mean, the clue is in the name. It's really easy to figure out what is role-play. Role-play is playing a role. There you go. Nice and simple. However, it has become almost pretty much synonymous now in many people's minds with the in-character talk. And it doesn't matter what that talk is. So long as you are talking as your character, you are role-playing. And that's not true. Let's say, for example, that, this is an extreme example. Obviously, you wouldn't actually see this in a game. But let's say, for example, that I am playing an elven ranger in a game of Dungeons and Dragons. And we're all sitting around the campfire at night, and the GM encourages us to do a bit of role-play rather than just setting up our watches and rolling to see whether we have any random encounters overnight. And we're sat around the campfire, telling stories in character of our background or our history or what we have planned for later adventures or what have you. Yeah, okay, so that's fairly good role play, because what you're doing is you're sitting there and you're acting in character. You're just acting out a part of the game that might otherwise be skipped over, but it's still a part of that character's life. You're still playing that character. But say, for example, as part of that, I started talking about my desire to fly out to the Spinwood Marches and obtain for myself a scout ship. That's nothing to do with D&D. That's Traveller. That's a completely different game. But if I'm saying it in character, then by many people's standards, that's roleplay. Even though I'm not playing that role, I'm playing a completely different role at that point. Not the role of the character that I'm supposed to be playing. Similarly, if talking in character like that is roleplay, how do I roleplay a mute? It's not physically possible. Because they can't talk, so how can I roleplay a mute? But I have done. I've done so very successfully. I had a very entertaining mute character. It wasn't technically mute. I can't remember the medical term now, but he had a condition whereby he had throat damage, whereby, of course, he could barely speak. It was painful to him to speak. He could barely speak, so he didn't speak. And I was playing that in a Call of Cthulhu game that Druttercup ran on stream. Didn't say a word in character for the entire game, but role-played for the entire thing very effectively, if I may say so myself, because roleplay is playing a character. But too many people think that roleplay is all about the talking. And as a result, you get two problems. The first problem is that people will roleplay, and as a result of doing so, kill a game. And that happens particularly in actual play podcasts, I have found. I'm a big fan of actual plays. I watch and listen to actual plays all the time, but I'm very, very picky. I start a lot of actual plays, and I continue listening to maybe 1 in 10 of them. One of the things that will turn me off straight away is if we start with cinematic description, where the GM is not explaining the situation to the player, as to where their characters are, etc., but instead is describing it as if they're reading out the notes from the screenplay as to what it should look like. All the big description of the camera pans across the city and zooms it. That turns me off. I hear that, and I will usually give people a couple of minutes to stop doing it, and then I turn the stream off. Because that just bugs me. It's just really annoying to me, so I don't listen to them. And the other thing is when the characters will witter on in character about nothing instead of getting on with the game. And I've tried on occasion sticking at it with some of these streams, and I've got to like half an hour, 3/4 of an hour, and nothing has happened in the game except people talking in character about nothing because the plot hasn't been introduced yet. And it's surprising, if you actually, like I do, you go through and you listened a lot to a lot of actual plays, you will find that a lot of actual plays do that. I would say the majority of actual plays do that now. Because they're not playing a role-playing game. They are engaging in improvised drama with the framework of a role-playing game. So that, unfortunately, that is what most of the solo RPG scene is now. There's a clue as to whether a game is going to be like that I have found from my research so far, which is that does this game have oracles in it? And particularly, does it make a big deal of oracles? Mainly the yes-no oracle. They sometimes use different terminology for these, like open and non-open questions, things like that. But basically, if you've got a yes-no question oracle, A, you don't need one. B, it isn't a new invention. It's been around as long as tabletop role-playing has. And C, that's usually a clue as to the way it's going to go, that it's going to be improvised storytelling. I've been saying improvised drama. It can be improvised drama. It can be improvised narrative. It depends on how much they think they're into role play and thus talking in character. So I tried watching this afternoon. I tried watching an actual play, solo actual play stream, and I had to turn it off because basically what I was getting was just a foiled thespian putting on the show that he might have done at a local theatre had his life gone in a different direction. He was talking in all of the characters and improvising whole scenes, but what he wasn't doing was playing a game. The game simply wasn't there at all. Now me, when I used to do solo role-playing, the term then was synonymous with solo dungeoneering. And that was what we were doing. We were dungeoneering. And if I just swap to a different scene for a moment so we can get Acrobat up. This is the first edition AD&D Dungeon Master's Guide, Appendix A. Random Dungeon Generation. So, this was used for two things. It was used so that the DM could randomly generate a dungeon if they were completely inspiration-starved. But also, many of us used it for solo dungeoneering. We would start with one of these. It presented us with 5 starting areas for a dungeon to give you a little bit of a start. And then from there, it goes on and lets us roll for, we have a periodic check. So when you going down a corridor, so let's say we come in to number 1 here, and we decide to go straight across this central square and out of the corridor opposite. We then hit a periodic check. So we'd roll a d20 and it would determine whether we're going straight, whether it's a door, a side passage, whether the passage turns, hits a chamber or stairs or a dead end, or a trick or a trap or a wandering monster. And that would be what the table would give us. On a d20 it would give us one of those results. And you just go through and you can just roll each room as you go and randomly generate monsters in those rooms. And it has tables for the size of the room and the shape of the room and what's likely to be in the room and things like that. And you can just randomly bash a dungeon. That's what solo role-playing meant when I used to do it back in the day. It wasn't about me auditioning for local theatre. It was about me going into a dungeon, killing the monsters, taking the treasure, which is the heart of what dungeon roleplay is. I think too often people have forgotten the game part of role-playing game, and they focus on the storytelling, and it's either amateur dramatics, for those of you not in the United Kingdom, or it's improvised storytelling. Now, if you're going to do improvised storytelling, go ahead and do improvised storytelling. I have no problem with that. Love that. I used to go to creative writing classes when I was a kid. I used to write. I haven't done in many years, but I used to. I quite enjoy that sort of thing. And telling stories. I'm 11 years older than my sister. So when my sister was very young, I was old enough to be able to babysit, things like that. And I used to tell her stories. She'd get a bedtime story from me sometimes, and that would be made up. That would be improvised on the spot and would be generally fantasy genre, because I'm a D&D player and I'm into fantasy and I love Tolkien. So yeah, she'd get fantasy stories as bedtime stories from me rather than whatever you might get from somebody else. I've never had kids of my own, so that's why my story has to go back that far. But that's the kind of improvised storytelling. I've been known to do that. I quite enjoy that. There's nothing wrong with that. It's not a role-playing game. Rolling a few dice now and then to give you an inspiration for that is not a role-playing game. Picking up Rory's story cubes, they're not a role-playing game, but they serve the same function as many solo TTRPGs. So by the definition of how these solo TTRPGs work, all you need to do is attach a character sheet and even the most basic of character creation rules to Rory's story cubes, and it's a role-playing game all of a sudden. Not at all into that. So by this point, anybody who is watching who's into solo TTRPGs and started watching this stream because of it has gone. So I no longer need to worry about talking to them. They will have possibly sworn at the stream, possibly disagreed with me, but one way or another, let's face it, they've gone. If you're into solo RPGs of the kind that I've just been criticising heavily and you are still here, congratulations for sticking with it. I'm not a complete arsehole, and there will be some overlap between what I intend to do and those games. But what I'm saying is that that's not what I want to do. that is not a role-playing game. That is a storytelling game or a story crafting game, because you've gamified the act of creative writing. You can gamify anything. It's very popular. It swings in and out as to how popular it is from time to time. But at times, it has been extremely popular to gamify various forms of therapy, for example. It doesn't mean going to therapy is a role-playing game. Quite the opposite. In fact, right now, role-playing games are being used as therapy. It's getting more and more common. It's a big thing. And it's extremely effective. But there is a difference there. They are doing therapy and using the role-playing game as a tool. They're not really playing a role-playing game. It's a different thing. So, what am I going to do? How am I going to go about this solo roleplay thing if I so dislike all of the modern tactics and systems that are out there for solo role-playing? Well, for starters, obviously, back in the old day, we would do solo dungeoneering with AD&D. It wasn't designed for solo role-playing. You can solo any game system. That's not an issue. What you do have the issue with there is, how do you go about turning it into a solo game? What do you do to provide that solo experience? Now, Dungeons and Dragons, dead easy solo dungeoneering. But what if you don't want to dungeoneer in your solo role-playing game? And that's where things like the oracles and so forth come in. And I was quite mean about oracles earlier on. But I am going to say now that correctly used and correctly constructed, they have their place. What I dislike, as much as anything, I dislike the term. And I dislike the yes-no oracles. The reason for this is quite simple. By the way, I will say now, you're going to have to excuse me. I'm a very British streamer, and as a result, I have got a cup of tea. I have got some digestives to dunk in my tea. And because I am also very insecure and anxious about this particular stream, I have a small scotch. Cheers. So, the thing with oracles, and the name is part of why I dislike the name. The thing with oracles is, if you think about what an oracle is, an oracle answers questions. That's what an oracle is. It's what an oracle does. You know, mytho-historically, that is what an oracle was, did. They answered questions. There was a difference between a prophet and an oracle, for example, because a prophet would turn up and tell you something you never knew you wanted to know, and probably didn't want to know, in fact, and probably regretted knowing afterwards, whereas an oracle would answer your questions. That's why they use the term in these games. They talk about an oracle. Here's my problem with that. What questions are you asking it? And there's a lot of advice on getting into solo RPGs that addresses this, that this is the big stumbling block. I've created my character and I don't know what to do. Where do I go from here? And I've watched some of this advice, and what it largely comes down to is, to play these games, you make that mental shift from being a player in a game to being the writer of a story. And the game is just a framework to help you write the story. So, by definition, nothing surprising can ever happen in that kind of oracle-based game, because the oracle only ever answers questions you have asked it. You will never be surprised. You might find it mildly interesting that option A happened instead of option B of the ones that you asked about. But they're still going to be options that you have created, you have brought to the game, you have chosen as things you think would be good to happen to your character. Whether good because they're good for your character or just good because they make an interesting story. The best solo TTRPGs of this kind. I keep saying TTRPG despite saying earlier on that I was going to drop the TT and just say RPG. The best players of this kind are the ones who are absolutely into the storytelling. because they're not thinking what is best for my character. They're thinking what is best for the story. And there's a whole subject on that, a whole other subject on that has nothing to do with solo TTRPGs, which I've got a half-written blog post on that one day I might finish and put out. But that's not a subject for today. Very much not a subject for today. But what are these questions going to be? They're always going to come from you, and therefore they're never going to be surprising. The only way that you can play a role-playing game solo and have it really surprise you at all, and as a result, interest me, because this is going to sound mean. This is going to sound like I'm having a go at the people who play these games, and I'm not. But I don't need the crutch. If I want to tell a story, I will open up a word processor and I will start writing a story. If I need some inspiration somewhere, if I haven't got the inspiration, I won't write. I'll write when I've got inspiration, basically. So the usefulness of writing tools when you're writing without inspiration, I absolutely acknowledge and respect. Because, as I said, I used to do creative writing. But if I'm not inspired, I'm not going to write. I don't make myself write. If I were going back to much younger me who aspired to be a novelist, yeah, I would need to make myself write then. So then those tools would come in useful. I would use whatever tools, whether gamified ones or not, to help me to write. But right now, I don't. If I want to tell a story, I will just sit down and write the story. If I want to play a game, I want to play a game. That's a different thing. I don't need the crutch of a solo RPG to tell an interesting story if I've got that story in my mind. Yeah, absolutely, Alia. You can't go off plot in a solo RPG because you're creating the plot. So it's impossible to go off plot. You can't go away from what you're doing. Just very confusing. So the way that you can get some surprise in a solo RPGing is by generating the events randomly. So first off, you would randomize the quest. Now, the better games, something like, say, Ironsworn. I've had a look at Ironsworn, and I haven't managed to get on with Ironsworn. But I'm going to give it another go at some point, possibly as part of this series. Who knows? It's not where I'm going to start, because I want to ease myself in via mechanisms that I know already work for me into solo RPGs. But the better games, like, say, Ironsworn, they have tables for generating what these quests might be. And they have tables often for generating the world. I think they go a bit too far on world generation, to be honest. The assumption that you need to create a world for your game is again down to role-playing game as storytelling. Because if you're telling a story, you need to create a world for that story. If only because your PC is the primary actor in that story. If your main protagonist is your PC, then the world has to revolve around your PC. And therefore you should create a world that will revolve around your PC. If, on the other hand, you're just looking to play a game, why waste the time? Solo role-play in the Forgotten Realms. It's there, it's pre-created, it's huge, it has loads of interesting stuff already. It's got factions, it's got nations, it's got dungeons, it's got different races, it's got monsters, it's got everything you could possibly need for your game. So why would you waste your time making something else? Again, if you want to go Pathfinder instead of D&D, Galarian, same thing. It's already there. The only reason to create a world at the beginning of your RPG, your solo RPG, is so that that world revolves around your player character. And the reason for it to revolve around your player character is because you're telling a story with that player character as the main protagonist. Bit of a difference in attitude. Some people play RPGs to be the big hero. Some people play RPGs to be a character in that world. I tend to run the latter style of game, but giving my player characters the opportunity to be heroic if that's what they want to do. They can be the big hero of a situation without being the big hero of the world. If you save a beggar, you're the big hero as far as that beggar is concerned. If you save a king, you are the big hero as far as that kingdom is concerned. If you fight off Galactus, you are the big hero as far as that world is concerned. You always get to be the big hero. It's just a matter of scale. Very bad at being a big hero. You play very good reluctant heroes, actually, Trout. Very good indeed. I've had decision shift as I wrote a character, but that's based on the choices you made earlier, blah, blah, blah. Yeah, now, I suspect, guessing, but I suspect you're a little bit more like me. Don't take this terminology too literally, but I jokingly tend to describe myself as a method role player. And in the same way, I am a bit of a method writer. I get in the head of my characters, and I get whether I'm playing them in a role-playing game or whether I'm writing them in something. So sometimes where I think I'm going to take the story doesn't go that way because I realize it's just not right for the character. And that's just down to knowing your character well. And it's, hate to say it, that is roleplay. Playing the character's role. Acting as they should act. There's been a thing, it pops up now and then over the years. Big argument over apparently one of the worst faux pas you can make as a player in a role-playing game is to fall back on, that's what my character would do. What none of the argument against that ever points out is that they're arguing against the abuse of that. It's not a bad thing. You should do what your character would do. Don't make the decision based on what mechanic is best. Make the decision on what your character would do. If, however, you're deliberately using that to disrupt a game, which normally comes down to you have created a character that is deliberately disruptive because you're an asshole, then it's a bad thing. But nobody ever looks at the good side of it. They just bitch about the bad side of it. And as a result, there is a certain type of role player who has grown up learning that that's what my character would do is a bad thing. And as a result, they don't role play. They play it like it's a war game. Do what is tactically correct at the time, not what is in character. That's a bad way of playing. And there's kind of a... Going to go slightly sideways here, bit left at the traffic lights. There is something in common with society and gaming. Because essentially they're both communities on one level and another. And the thing that I'm thinking of particularly in common here is that every generation thinks they are inventing it all for themselves. So in society, every generation thinks that their parents never rebelled, their parents never had sex, their parents just don't understand what it's like to be a kid because obviously they were born middle-aged. And the same happens in role-playing games. Every generation of new players coming into role-playing games thinks they've invented everything. And in particular, they think they've invented roleplay. They look back and they use terms like murder hobo, and they look at the wargaming origin of D&D and say, yeah, but that was just a war game. They weren't role-playing. We like to role-play now. It's all narrative and story-driven now, which it isn't. Very much not. But we role-played from day one. We always role-played. And that's just the way it works. Is my stream still okay? Because I'm just... Yep, good. Okay. I just noticed I'd been disconnected temporarily from the chat on my browser, so I was worrying a little bit about whether my stream was still okay, but the stream seems to be okay. Good. Yeah, if you create a character knowing that character is going to be disruptive, if you create a character accidentally that turns out to be disruptive, then you have a choice at that point. You can either perform a little psychic surgery on your character and gradually twist it towards not being disruptive, or you can say, right, okay, this character doesn't work in this group, so I thought it would, but it doesn't, so I'm going to pull them out and create a new character. Is that okay with you, DM? And you can work things that way. But if you create a character deliberately to be disruptive, what have we got here? A paladin, a lawful good cleric, and a neutral good ranger. I'm going to create a chaotic evil thief. That'll work. If you're doing that, you're the problem. It's not that your character's the problem, it's that you're the problem. And yeah, you're going to rely on it's what my character would do, but that's because you're playing the wrong character, and you know you're playing the wrong character. You're doing it on purpose. Stop it. Yeah, absolutely. The same. I remember I had to actually pull a character out of a game temporarily at one point back in the day, because we were passing through a forest, and it turned out that there was a nice sylvan forest with fairies in, and the fairies basically came along, and they were sort of dancing around us and throwing fairy dust around us, as they do, and they encouraged the party to run with the fairies. And this was a mechanism that the GM was using to get us through the forest in a hurry. So the characters ran with the fairies, and as a result, they crossed this forest in like a night rather than a week of travel. My character was extremely untrusting. About the only people that she trusted was the rest of the party at that point. So refused point blank to trust the fairies and their magic, and hung back. End result, she's a week behind everybody else minimum. And I was fine with that, because the only person that it hurt was me. It was in character for that character. And I said, yeah, okay, fair enough. Yeah, she's not going to run with them. She's just going to have to try and make her way on her own. And she actually did have magic, so what she largely did was to fly. And she couldn't fly. She hadn't got enough magic points to be able to zip along and keep up with them by any stretch of the imagination. But it did cut down the amount of time that she had to spend walking through the trees. Walking through a forest, much slower than flying over the top of it. Even if you only fly at walking speed, you're not dodging trees. So that was a situation where I hampered myself by doing what was right for my character, by role-playing. And I was fine with that, because that was the point of it, was the role-play, as far as I was concerned. So somewhere way back in the midst of time and history, we were talking about oracles and the problem with an oracle, and the fact that they just answer the questions that you ask. So what you need is some randomization to get your game going. There are a number of ways to do this. One of my favorites, it comes from Infinium Game Studios. They produced a series of image oracles, they call them. I say it's a one-man band. Very, very good stuff, but extremely crunchy and very detailed that they produce. And this image oracle thing, they made 6 of them, and each one is a 2d6 roll that generates, that at its simplest, each was a page with 36 images on. You roll a d6 down the side, a d6 along the top, and it gives you an image. And that image is your inspiration. But then, because that's not enough for Infinium, each image had an additional page. So there were then another 36 pages in it, because each image had a page which addresses what that image might be, because you can just look at the image and take your inspiration from there. But it addresses what that image might be if you're asking a yes-no question, for example. So the traditional yes-no oracle. And it went yes, no, maybe, etc., etc. If you were asking a more open question, if you wanted to have some inspiration in the form of a word, it would give words associated with the image. It has a new quest section, giving a suggested new quest for that image. It has a continuing quest, giving a suggestion for how that image might affect a quest that is ongoing. It has stuff on NPCs, so if you use that image to generate an NPC. So loads of good detail that doesn't have to come from your head, because it's coming from the book instead. They also make a solo, that I haven't really properly got into yet, a solo RPG toolkit. And that does have, you could use that as a GM if you're short of inspiration quite happily, because that will go through pretty much every step of generating your plot. What is the basic quest? Who is it coming from? Why do they need you to do it? Where is it? What's the reward going to be? What's the twist going to be? There are tables for all of these things in there. Now, with something like that, there you can properly roleplay. It can surprise you. Even the solo RPGs that do that tend to work on the principle that they'll roll up the initial quest and then you just go with it. So they're still back down to just the questions that you're asking. So what you need to be able to do is you need to have some way to throw randomness into the mix. Maybe one day, when I have actually got back into solo RPGing and I have found a suitable hybrid between the old school dungeoneering and the new school creative writing exercise pretending to be a game, I will try and write something that covers that hybrid, because I flatter myself that I'm pretty good at writing rules. Not that I think games have rules, or role-playing games have rules anyway. But yeah, we will see. So, I've bitched a lot about gaming. I've bitched about modern solo RPGs. But at the end of the day, I still want to solo RPG. I still want to play solo. So, where am I going to go with that? And I said I was going to take it slowly. So, easing myself in at the moment for me is going two ways. The first thing I'm going to do is my first real stream. This is a episode 0 stream. My first real stream is going to be a fighting fantasy game book, because I'm not going as far as the choose your own, because those are games, but they're certainly not role-playing games. The fighting fantasy game books aren't really role-playing games either, but they're a step closer, because what Ian Livingstone and Steve Jackson, who, by the way, were the founders of Games Workshop and the people who pretty much brought Dungeons & Dragons to the UK, what they did when they created those books is they'd seen the Choose Your Own Adventure books that were already available in America. And they thought it would be good to make them a bit meatier. So the fighting fantasy game books were the first ones to have game mechanics rather than just choices. So rather than just turn to page 32 or turn to page 36, you would, for example, meet a monster and there was a combat system in them. You fight the monster. At the beginning of the game, you roll your stats. So it really is. It's the first true solo RPG. Those game books. The ones that came before didn't have game mechanics. So that is the first true solo RPG. So I'm going to play one of them, probably using the conversion on the PC. There are some that are standalone, but there's also Fighting Fantasy Classics, which is free software, but you pay for the books. What I do want to do is, for that though, Drut, is I want to check I know you've done a couple, and I want to check which ones you've streamed, and I don't want to do them again. So then I'll pick a book after I've discussed that with you. So I'm going to start by doing one or two of the Fighting Fantasy game books, and I'm going to treat them properly. I am going to accept the decisions. I'm not going to play with the 5-finger bookmark. And I'm going to roll the dice, and we'll see. My characters may die, they may not. If my character dies, I'm setting this rule now. If my character dies, I failed that adventure. I'm not going to start it again. Which, of course, was what you do with the Fighting Fantasy game books. You usually had to play through them several times before you completed, before you would win, because there were so many places where things could go horribly wrong for you, even if the dice liked you. But that's not what I'm going to do. If I fail one, I'll move on and I'll do another book. After I have done however many of those to feel comfortable, I'm going to make another shift. And I am going to stick with Fighting Fantasy, but I'm going to go here. Advanced Fighting Fantasy, the role-playing game. Technically, this is Advanced Fighting Fantasy 2nd edition. Originally, it was called Dungeoneer Advanced Fighting Fantasy, and then it became Advanced Fighting Fantasy later on. And this is a full role-playing game based on the mechanics of those Fighting Fantasy game books. Told you that they were the world's first true solo RPG, because this is the 3rd edition of a game based on them and the 2nd edition of Advanced Fighting Fantasy, because initially we had Fighting Fantasy, the role-playing game. And that was in a paperback format, exactly the same format as the Fighting Fantasy game books, so like just slim novel format. And it contained everything that you needed to run adventures for your friends rather than go through them yourself using the choose your own style. Then Advanced Fighting Fantasy came along and it added in beefier rules. In theory, I could go through that evolution. I could go Fighting Fantasy Gamebook to Fighting Fantasy the RPG to Advanced Fighting Fantasy if I wanted to, and take it easier that way. And I could also deny that bot that is attempting to spam my chat, but I'm not going to. I'm not going to accept it. I'm going to deny it. Well, I am going to deny it. However, I think the purpose of going through Fighting Fantasy to Advanced Fighting Fantasy is really just to ease your way into true role-playing and more advanced mechanics. And I don't need... The mechanics aren't the issue. It's the role-playing part and the solo role-playing part that's the issue. So that's going to be just as easy with AFF as it would be with Fighting Fantasy. So that's where I'm going to go. I'm going to go Fighting Fantasy Gamebook, then I'm going to go Advanced Fighting Fantasy, the role-playing game. Now for this, as I said earlier, I don't need to do any world design because although they didn't start out with a world in mind, they created a world by writing the books. And I can't remember at what point in the series, I mean the series is so long now, but at some point fairly early on in that, they actually wrote a book detailing the world in which they're all set, the world of Titan. The book was called, surprise, surprise, Titan. They also did a book called Out of the Pit, which is a bestiary that collated monsters from the Fighting Fantasy game books up to that point. So loads of good stuff that are just a source for the role-playing game. Because although Advanced Fighting Fantasy gives more advanced rules for player characters, monsters are exactly the same in that as they are in the Fighting Fantasy game books, and therefore exactly the same as in Out of the Pit. So Out of the Pit serves as a bestiary published before the role-playing game that it applies to, which I think is cool, and which applies to two role-playing games, Fighting Fantasy and Advanced Fighting Fantasy. It applies equally well to both of them. You've got to be happy with that. So that's where I'm going to go, and I'm probably going to use the Infinium tools to generate my quests, and I'm going to read through and see how best I can prevent them from being just me deciding where the story goes. If I can't find one in the tool set, I'm going to invent a mechanic for throwing twists in. So let's talk about that for a moment. Now, how do you go about throwing a twist into your game so that in such a way that it catches you by surprise because you don't know about it? There's a couple of very simple options that spring immediately to mind. One is that maybe once per scene, at some point during that scene, you roll a die and decide, you set this up in advance. You don't decide it at the moment because that's almost as bad as the Oracle thing. But you roll a die and it determines whether there is a twist. So you might say, for example, this is a fairly straightforward adventure, so I'm going to use a d20, and if I roll a 1, it's going to turn on its head. Or you could say, this is an utter head thriller of a scenario. God knows where it's going to go. I'm going to roll a d6 each scene, and on a 1, it goes, it flips the whole thing on its head. Doesn't have to be the same with every adventure. You can decide what kind of adventure do you want. Do you want a fairly straightforward adventure, or do you want a really convoluted adventure and use it that way? The other way of doing it that springs immediately to mind is to tie it to the game's actual dice mechanics. A lot of games have some kind of fumble rule. If you don't have a fumble rule in your game, maybe you replace what would have been a fumble rule with a twist generator. So let's take AFF, where you are generally needing to roll high. Let's say that you roll a natural 1 on both d6s when you're making a roll. I think it's rolling 2d6 in AFF. Been a while since I played it. If you roll that double 1, maybe that means that there is going to be a twist in this scene. And perhaps you have a generic table for what the twist might be. Not obviously you learn the tables, so there's no point having a table that tells you what your twist is going to be. That's not really going to work unless you've got a really big table. you're going to learn that table. And either way, you're going to learn the probabilities on that table anyway. So instead, maybe you have a more generic system. So, okay, I rolled a double 1. That means that there's going to be some kind of twist kick in on this this scene. So maybe I'll roll the 2 dice again, using 2 dice of different colours for good measure, because there's a lot of mechanics you can do by rolling 2 different coloured dice. And maybe we say that I've got a black die and a white die, just to be traditionalist. So I roll the 2 dice again. If the white die comes up higher, maybe the twist is something positive. And if the black die comes up higher, maybe the twist is something negative. Then maybe I can use the specific numbers on them to give me some other idea. So, for example, I could have a table, a 2 to 12 table that gives me a general type of twist. So I roll my dice, look the number up on the table to see what kind of twist it is, look at the dice colours to see whether it's a positive or negative twist. Maybe I can also do something different with the dice to indicate something else. Maybe each of the 2 dice is then looked up on another table to give me a different element. So that one roll of 2d6 is now providing me 4 different pieces of information from one roll that will let me tie this twist down to what it might be. Ultimately, I still have to decide it. Yes. There isn't really a way around that unless everything is being done on a huge number of extensive tables that cover every situation, and that basically is impossible. So at that point, you just have to drop into GM mode, and you just have to forget that you're running it for yourself, that you're the player as well. And just as a game master, you just have to think, okay, so what do these results mean? And you move it on accordingly. So it's still the random element is shifting where the plot is going, but there is still some element of you as a game master making that decision. But you're not just saying, okay, we've come to a forest. What do I think is going to be cool with this forest? Oracle are there elves in the forest? That's me deciding I want elves in the forest. Whereas a random table that indicates that the forest is enchanted, or the forest is cursed, or the forest is burning down, or the forest is under threat of some kind, or whatever, gives me... The more you can narrow it down before you get to the point of actually asking the Oracle question, the more it's going to catch you by surprise, because the more it's going to be different from what you thought it was going to be when you set out. I also said earlier that oracles weren't needed because they always existed. And this, again, is true. And I'm going to explain that now. I should have explained it earlier, really, but I didn't. So I'm going to explain it now. Dungeon masters, since the very beginning, have always used the dice to shape the story. An oracle is using the dice and applying it to a table. The table gives you a result. Yes, no oracle. You roll your dice, whichever dice it is, and you apply it to the table, and it might give you a yes, it might give you a hell yes. These are not the terminology. These are not necessarily the terminology used in the tables. It might give you a maybe. It's the magic 8-ball, isn't it? It's like try again later. It might give you a no. It might give you a hell no. The better tables might give you a no but, or a yes and, or a yes but, or a no and, things like that. The thing is, all that is just somebody writing down into a table a formalization of what we've always done anyway. If I haven't decided, if it makes no difference to me as a game master, on a particular subject when the player asks me about it, I will roll a die. And I will use the result of the die to influence my result. So, for example, somebody might ask... does one of these guards have a key on him for this gate? And if I really don't care, because I need them to go through the gate, but I'm happy with them to break it down or pick it or whatever to get through the gate, so maybe one of them's got a key for the gate, maybe I don't care. So I'll just roll the die. I'll say, okay, so I'm going to say he probably hasn't, because that would be very insecure to give the key to the gate to the guy guarding it outside. But let's say there's a 30% chance that he has a key to the gate, and I'll roll the dice. Get under 30? Yeah, he's got a key to... One of them has a gate key on him. Bingo, you're in. If it's something a bit more vague, what's the weather like? And I haven't thought about it. I haven't worked it out in advance, and I don't care what the weather's like. I might roll a die and pick high is good, low is bad. And then based on what the die roll is, I might decide what the weather is going to be like. And the extremity of the weather will be determined by how high or low the result is. So if I roll a d20, for example, like 9, 10, 11, pretty mild day, nothing interesting to say about it. 19 or 20, it's a heat wave. 1 or 2, there's a storm. In between, you get lesser amounts, So around like 14, 15, yeah, it's a warm day, but nothing's exceptional. Round about sort of 4 or 5 or 6, maybe it's a bit drizzly and downcast, but it's not really bad. And you just use the scale of the die to determine your result. Just if the result can be on a scale, you just roll the die and say it's roughly that way along the scale. So on the scale from heat wave to storm, my die tells me where I'm going to be. And that's that question answered. So we've always done that. I think GMs have always done that since the very beginning. And I still, to this day, I do that all the time in my games. When players ask a question that I have not got the answer for, is I will roll the dice. Either as a percentage chance of, for a yes-no question, I determine a percentage chance of yes, essentially. So for a simple yes-no question, all you need as an oracle is just a pair of percentile dice, and say everything has a 50-50 chance because I don't trust myself not to skew it the wrong way. Or you say, I am going to skew this because of this, because I think this would be good for the story. And then you use the scale. So if I've got a 50-50 chance of it being yes, and I roll 54, that's yes, but it's only just yes. So that's a yes, but. If, on the other hand, I roll like 70, that's a fairly solid yes. If I roll 98, that's yes and. That's super yes. It's yes and then some. And you don't need a table for that. You just need the dice and a little common sense, a little imagination. And if you haven't got imagination, why are you attempting to create a story, right? And maybe the fact that you don't have that imagination is why you need the game framework to tell your story instead of just writing a story. Who knows? It's a possibility. I look forward to reading that in full, Alia, and deciding how many XP I'm going to give you for it. So, is there anything else I need to cover for my episode 0, I wonder? We know where we're going initially. We don't know where we're going in the long term, but we know where we're going initially. We're going to the fighting fantasy game books, then to advanced fighting fantasy. After that, when I've sort of knocked the dents out of my style of solo roleplay, which is more focused on playing the game than doing the creative writing. The story is not the point of the game. The story is what happens because of the game. A good example, I suppose. You should be role-playing in a role-playing game. I've said earlier, role-playing is playing the role. It's acting as the character should act when making your decisions. Are the characters telling a story? No, they're living a story. That's what a role-playing game should be. It should not be about telling a story. It should be about finding a story, experiencing that story, having that story happen to you, not about telling it. The only player in a role-playing group who can legitimately think about telling a story, not counting bards, is the game master. And even the game master, they should still be discovering that story, not telling it. They're just shaping how the discovery goes. They're making a bigger impact as to how the story's going to go. But this is contentious, and even I may not agree with me. But I am going to say that the biggest factor in storytelling in a role-playing game is the dice. That the second biggest factor is the game system. That the third is the GM. and that the players are way down at the back because they have the least input. They decide how the dice might be able to change the story, but it's the dice that change it. So, that I've just done that list off the top of my head just now. I've thought about it before, but I've never really compiled the list. So maybe that is due for revision. Maybe I will decide to change that at a later date. But I don't think it's unreasonable. Telling a story is not the player's job in a role-playing game. Living a story is the player's job. That's what you're there for. You're there to experience the adventure and to play the game. That's what it's about, playing a game. And that's what I want out of solo RPGs. I want to play a game, not to tell a story. And too often when you look at the solo RPG content on YouTube, you find that it is essentially someone sitting down to tell a story, and that the framework of the game helps them to shape where the story is going, but they're still telling a story, not playing a game. Not what I want. We know what I want. We know what I'm going to try and do. I don't know when I'm going to do it. I don't have a time slot sorted for this. This first session is going out on a Monday just because I've been thinking about it for a couple of weeks, and I thought, about time I actually did something with this. I wanted to do an introductory session, so let's do an introductory episode now. We'll do an episode 0 and put it out. When it will go out in future is going to be partly when I have time for it, partly when I have inspiration for it, and partly when I feel up to it, honestly. Because the Fighting Fantasy gamebook part, that's easy enough. I love those gamebooks. I used to play them as a kid. I still enjoy them now. So yeah, I will work out one of those, and I'll probably stream that fairly soon when I can find a space for it. But we'll see where we go after that. But because of the nature of this stream, unlike my Mapper Monday streams, I think these will all have to go to YouTube. These are going to be numbered. And again, I am not telling a story with these streams, but these streams will tell a story. I'm not telling it, but the streams will tell the story of my investigations into solo RPGs and whether I can manage to make them work. So they're going to be numbered. This is number 0. There is going to be more. And they will form a documentation. They will you'll be able to go back and look over them and see the history of my efforts to get into solo RPGs. Whether I succeed or fail, that story has yet to be told. But it won't be told by me. It'll be told by the stream as we go. So that is going to be enough of this for today, I feel. Where's OBS gone? There's OBS gone. I accidentally let it go behind the browser. Yeah, I'll have a look at which because between us I've bought some, you've bought some, so between us we should have a bunch of Fighting Fantasy books in the Steam family library. So we'll work out what game we're going to play next. I'll find out which ones Drut's already run. At some point, if I can forget the content of them enough, I'd quite like to do the 2 solo adventures that I own for the Dark Eye role-playing game. Now, Drut has done them. I think Drut played through one of them straight on stream, the second one, or possibly the first one. But it was the second stream that we did. But before that, I'd actually run one for Drut as if I were GMing it. Just rather than her reading the results, I was reading the results to her. So I'd quite like to go through those again because they were interesting and I like the system for Dark Eye. So that's something that will probably happen. And at some point, I will almost certainly, when I feel better able to do so, have a go at Iron Sworn. Because Iron Sworn is free. Iron Sworn can be played solo, can be played GM-less as a group, or can be played as traditional GMing. So on that basis, if you're just looking to try a different fantasy RPG, Iron Sworn is a very well produced game. It's of a certain style. It's not powered by the apocalypse, but you can see the influence of games like games like that, which is not really my style. But on the other hand, a bad role-playing game is better than no role-playing game, to my mind. So I'll almost certainly give that a try at some point. Yeah, they were. And there are other games that have done similar things. So I will probably dig them out as well. Look for games that have a choose-your-own style solo introductory game to them. Maybe, not guaranteeing it, but maybe I will even play on stream the original 1983 Redbox Dungeons and Dragons from, I say original, it's not original D&D, it's the Redbox D&D, which was 1983. It went OD&D, then that went to BX, which was the Holmes edition of D&D, that was about the same time that Advanced Dungeons & Dragons came out. And then that got slightly rewritten by Frank Mentzer to be the Beckme edition, which added that there was a basic and an expert set in the Holmes edition. The Mentzer one went basic, expert, then added companion, master, and immortals boxes to that. And in the red box for the Beckme edition, I don't have the Holmes one, so I don't know if it was in there as well. There is a little solo play where you play a rogue, play a thief as they were in those days. So maybe I'll even play that on stream, because that's about as classic solo RP as you can get, really. The introductory choose-your-own style solo game from 1983 Redbox Dungeons & Dragons. Maybe we'll give that a go. But we will be back. We will do more of these streams. Depending on how the process goes, this may last a long time or it may last a short time. We don't know. Maybe I'll square and give it up after a few streams because I'm just not getting anywhere. But maybe it'll be a thing. We'll see. Next stream, though, is definitely going to be one of the Fighting Fantasy game books. I'll decide which one in between times, and I will come back with a Fighting Fantasy game book on the next solo stream. Meanwhile, tomorrow I will be running my obsession system for my current chat, pretty much, unless Robinson's still there, in which case for 2/3 of my current chat. Dratacup, Alia, and Chrono Magistrate I will be running for tomorrow evening on this very channel. So do pop back and check that out if you haven't already seen it. And the episodes up to now, the sessions up to now are all on my YouTube channel as well. So you can do that. Until the next time then, whether that be tomorrow or later, may your dice be hot and your characters cool.